We all are gonna die. 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 Why don't we help each other prepare for it? Without death there could not be life. I'm talking about end of life conversations, conversations about the end of life. Death and dying, grief and loss, conversations about the end of life.
All the beautiful elements that comprised our bodies can become one with the soil and then feed new life. And our process of terramation performs that in 2 to 4 months. It actually, the process is complete after between 28 and 33 days. And then there's a curing period for that soil before the soil is then returned to a family.
Welcome to this episode of End of Life Conversations. I'm Reverend Wakil David Matthews.
And I'm the Reverend Mother Ana Luisa Armendariz. In this podcast, we share people's experiences with death and dying, grief and loss, and the end of life.
We really enjoy all of our excellent and insightful guests. They generously tell their stories with compassion and wisdom. We also want to thank Wakil and Wendy's children and partners for that wonderful introductory song. Okay, let's get started. Today we are speaking with Mike Reagan. Mike is the CEO of The Natural Funeral, an end-of-life doula, a hospice volunteer, and a grief facilitator. Mike's journey in end-of-life care started during his high school years as a cemetery laborer and apprentice at a family-owned funeral home in Medfield, Massachusetts. This experience laid the foundation for a lifelong dedication to supporting individuals and families during poignant and transformative moments.
Over the years, Mike has served hundreds of patients during their final stage of life and accompanied many of them at a time of their passing through his work as a hospice volunteer and end-of-life doula. These deeply moving experiences have enriched his understanding of the profound impact of presence and compassion during life's most sacred transitions. Each of his life experiences have shaped Mike, preparing him to lead the Natural Funeral home. Driven by a passion for improving the world, Mike is committed to revolutionizing the funeral industry. He envisions a future where families are empowered with dignified and ecological death care options, aiming to enhance the natural funeral's impact on our planet and communities. Welcome, Mike. Good to see you.
Thank you. Yeah, it's wonderful to be here. It's good to see you both.
Great to have you.
Yeah.
We always start with the same question just to get going.
Yeah.
And just to ask you when you first became aware of death.
Well, I guess that would be with my work at the cemetery. I was 15 years old, started as a laborer there as one of about 20 kids that got a job during spring break to clean up the cemetery before Memorial Day. And then at the end of that work effort, they kept 3 of us on for the summer, and I got chosen as one. So, and then I ended up working there and at the funeral home for the next 7 years during school breaks until I graduated college.
Wow. That is so cool.
Yeah.
Can you tell us a little more about that experience?
Yeah, it was, so it started at the cemetery, and I did everything from, rake leaves to mow lawns to dig graves. It was cheaper to pay the kids to dig the graves than it was to hire a backhoe from the highway department. And I appreciated a good paying job. So, but not long after I started the cemetery, the superintendent of the cemetery was also the local undertaker. He liked my work ethic and said, any chance you're interested in coming to the funeral home before you start your work day at the cemetery, and you can wash and wax the cars. And so I said, absolutely. I was a young kid, wanted to make money. And then I remember one day I was waxing a car, and in the garage where we did that, it was adjacent to the embalming room and where they also did autopsies. And he was testing me. He said, do me a favor, get the Phillips head screwdriver out of it's on the shelf in the embalming room. And I went in, and there was a young man, probably 20 years old, who was someone we took into our care from the local prison. And he had been stabbed many times, and he had just undergone an autopsy. And so there he was, spread open on the autopsy table. And after about 5 minutes, my boss said, "Hey, you okay in there?" And I said, "Yeah, this is so cool." And and he's like, "You passed the test. Okay." And then it wasn't more than a couple of weeks where he had me in Boston getting licensed as an apprentice under him. So yeah, from that early experience, I believe that who we are as individuals are souls occupying a physical human body for a period of time. And when our life ends here on earth, our soul moves on. And what remains is this beautiful vessel that housed our soul during that time. And it wasn't like I gave it a lot of thought. It was just my natural core belief that just existed. It was kind of like a knowing. And so I found I didn't find any real discomfort in caring for the bodies of decedents. And I actually found it enjoyable to be present in support of families during the funeral process. And I would say that was probably my favorite aspect of working at a funeral home was just being present and supporting families during that difficult time.
Yeah, very nice.
That is
Yeah.
so beautiful because it is kind of foundational as to where you started and here you are.
Yeah.
So my question, death was there throughout these formative school years. And then what happened in the middle and how did you get to where you're at now?
Yeah. So I almost went into the Catholic seminary right out of college. I loved the life that the Dominican fathers who taught at my college, I loved their lifestyle. But upon the advice of my parents and some priest friends of mine, they both said, well, why don't you go get a taste of, the working life before you commit to a life of, celibacy and poverty, and obedience, which would be the case if I became a Catholic, Dominican priest. And so I did. I went off to I got a job in the tech industry and did that for 4 years and had a wonderful ride there and exposure to a really high growth company in the late 80s, but I kept feeling drawn back into a life of service. And so I left the tech industry, went into the Catholic seminary, stayed for 6 months, and then decided, due to more issues tied to theology than lifestyle, I chose to leave. And then I re-entered the tech industry, was there for a total of 31 years before I felt called to move on to something that was closer to my heart space and what really fulfilled me. So in 2017, I left the cybersecurity industry and became it kind of took early retirement and became a hospice volunteer. And I found it to be the most rewarding work I've ever done. It filled my heart every day, and it's been wonderful. And then to your point, what maybe it was you, Ana Louise, who said, to come back around full circle. I look back on my life and the opportunities that have been presented in my end of life service work, and I see the tapestry that's been woven. You don't see it at the time; you just see individual stitches, right? But now I can see, this all makes sense. And it was even further sort of validated when my buddy Seth Vidal, whom I met at a mindfulness training course for hospice volunteers back in 2017. He approached me a little over a year ago and said, "Mike," and Seth was one of the founders of the Natural Funeral. He was here when the doors opened, and he said, "Look, we've got this really amazing offering that we can take nationwide, and that's called terramation, or natural organic reduction." At the time, I think there were 7 states in which it was legal. It's now legal in 12 states. And I expect by the end of next year, it'll be legal in another 8 to 10 states. So there's this green movement happening. And Seth said, "Mike, we got this awesome technology and we can grow it across the country, but I need someone to help me run the company." And so he invited me to join the Natural Funeral as the CEO. And tying back into that tapestry story or analogy, my business experience can come into play and be coupled with my experience in end-of-life care. And it's just a beautiful coming together of skill sets and experiences to help bring natural death care to the country and the world. And so it's exciting. Yeah.
Yeah.
So
I love
beautiful.
That. It's
Yeah.
I'm just sort of over here laughing because I had a 30-year career
Yep.
in cybersecurity.
Oh, no kidding. Okay.
Yeah.
And
We
when I
got to talk
retired,
offline.
yeah,
Yeah.
we do. And when I retired, I started doing hospice work. And then,
Wow.
then I went to
Okay.
seminary and I met Annalisa,
Yes.
and here we are.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, we should talk
Wow.
about that
Peas in a
sometime.
pod. Yeah.
I know. Pretty funny.
That's
That's
beautiful.
great.
Ah, I
Yeah.
love it.
Yeah. Well, you
I
talked a
do
little
love
bit
that
about,
tapestry.
yeah, isn't
Yeah.
that awesome? And it's awesome to like step back, like you said, step back and look at it and go, oh, that's how I got here.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
As I do that now, I just have such a deep sense of gratitude for
Yeah. Yeah.
knowing everything's been unfolding as it's been meant to.
Meant to
And,
be.
Yeah,
it's
exactly.
been beautiful. And yeah, a lot of gratitude.
Inspired me to go to hospice was having dealt with, or lived with my parents when they died. And the hospice people came in and I was like, my goodness, these are angels. I want to do that.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
when I had the time again, I said, oh, it's going to jump in and do it. So I had a wonderful time. And then I worked as a volunteer hospice chaplain for seminary as my internship for seminary. So that was pretty cool. Anyway, we want to keep going. It's
Yeah. Okay.
so fascinating. Can you tell us a little more about the natural funeral and what kind of work they do, what kind of work you're involved in there?
Sure. Yeah. So the natural funeral was started here in Boulder County, Colorado, to offer natural death care to folks at the end of life. There is gosh darn it.
We'll start that one again when he comes back.
Yeah. I love his language. I resonate with how he speaks. He is kind of like peas in a pod here with us.
I know, it's kind of funny. He mentioned having had a really beautiful experience where he's helping a family, and they said afterwards, it's so wonderful to feel unconditional love from a man because they had been abused by men, and to have somebody come in and just demonstrate that a male does have the capacity and capability of being loving and caring really made a difference for them. So, and I said, yeah, that totally fits with how my life has been. So it's been, one time after another, this opportunity to say not all men are.
Yeah. Well, to flip the narrative.
Yeah.
Right. To like redo the circuitry of our collective that sometimes men are dangerous, but in fact, here you are.
Sorry, guys.
Welcome back.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah. So you had asked.
You were talking about.
Yeah. So the natural funeral was originally started with a mission to provide natural death care options to the Boulder community and the greater Boulder community. And that's evolved from sort of home funerals and home vigils to natural death care. We never do any embalming, but then evolving to different disposition options that are more eco-friendly. That includes green burial, water cremation, and then terramation, which is our fastest growing disposition option. And terramation evolved, its legal name is natural organic reduction. And that's when a body of a decedent is transformed into regenerative living soil. And that's a process that we have honed. Mother Nature created it. Right. And if a person's body were buried, it just as a green burial. So no embalming, no big metal casket, just a green burial is performed. It would take on average about 20 years for that body, usually with the exception of the bones, to transform and be one with the soil. And all the beautiful elements that comprised our bodies can become one with the soil and then feed new life. And our process of terramation performs that in 2 to 4 months. It actually, the process is complete after between 28 and 33 days. And then there's a curing period for that soil before the soil is then returned to a family. And it's quite a shift in terms of environmental impact from conventional funerals where people get pumped with toxic chemicals and formaldehyde to preserve them. If you think about it, our bodies are comprised of the same elements that the trees and the plants and other animals are comprised of. And
exactly. Yeah.
And we have the opportunity to return that vessel and all the goodness of it to support new growth and new life. But conventional approaches would sort of destroy that opportunity. So the Natural Funerals created a terramation vessel network, which is a set of vessels in which terramation is performed and all the supporting equipment. And we are deploying those across the country for funeral homes and crematory operators that want to offer terramation to their communities. And it's a way for existing funeral homes and crematory operators to address the growing demand for green funeral options, while at the same time sort of providing them an opportunity to grow their business in their local region, because more and more people are hopping on the green bandwagon. And it's absolutely a gift to see that movement flourish. And we're happy to be part of it. Yeah.
Yeah,
I am
that's
so
great.
excited for this. Yeah, I think
Yeah.
that a lot more people are learning about it. And I keep hearing it in conversations with how they just kind of like got it peripherally and are interested in learning more. So I think you're right where you need to be.
Thank you. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, we got to go to our local one. I'm in Washington State.
Oh, okay.
It's one of the states that has that. We got to go. We had a conference here, and we got to go tour one of the places here that does that.
Yeah.
And I got a little button that says, "Please compost me."
Nice. That's good. Good. I love that.
I've had many comments on it.
I did a tour here in the Arvada place that you and Seth have put together. And I love that you open it up once a month for families to go and sit with their, would we still say decedents?
Decedents, yeah.
Actually, that's so cool.
Yeah, we actually open it up once a month for the general public to come see what we're doing. We want to educate people and let them know what other options are available, and to see firsthand what that regenerative living soil looks like at the end of the process. It's really, it's powerful and informative for people. We will provide families whose loved ones are in our care going through that terramation process. We'll facilitate visitations for them any number of times during
outside of those
that period. Yeah. So
that's beautiful.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah.
So with this new green and ecological kind of opening of our psyches in the world, right?
Yeah.
What are the challenges that you are seeing or hearing or feeling around any of this?
Yeah, I think the biggest challenge is awareness. When we have the chance to explain what terramation is, 99% of the time, the response is, that just makes sense. The way I explain it is we live our lives in sort of cooperation between our bodies and this beautiful biome of other living beings that coexist in our bodies. And they support our immune system. You think of gut health, right? There's this healthy bacteria that lives in us and allows us to thrive while we're alive. And when we die, that sort of biome gets changed. The next phase of development for that bacteria is to multiply and continue to benefit from what our body can offer them and to work towards continuation and extended life. And if we allow our bodies to be terramated, we get transformed into soil that then fosters new life. If we go down the conventional path of asking to be embalmed, it immediately kills all of that beautiful bacteria that up until that point holds this huge potential to foster new life. And then we end it. And so I think when people come to view things not from a conventional lens, the way things have always been done, but rather what really would make the most sense to continue giving. And that's why I said most people say, well, gosh, you're right. That just makes sense. And then if you look at it from the environmental perspective, each terramation process sequesters just over a half a ton of carbon. And a flame cremation or traditional burial generates about a half a ton. Actually, no, it's about 500 pounds of CO2, a little more than that for traditional burial. So the environmental swing can be significant. So
that's so great.
Yeah.
It seems like, if we thought about it that way, we could consider it a pro-life activity.
There you go. That's a different angle on pro-life. I like that. Yeah, that's good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, the life that keeps on giving, right?
Yeah.
What do you think would help support you, but support people doing this work or support learning more about it? What kind of things would help?
Well, there's a lot of effort afoot out there. Just seeing the speed at which natural organic reduction is being proposed in state legislatures, it's really a wonderful sign. Get out and support your state legislature in passing a law that allows for natural organic reduction.
Mm-hmm.
Again, it's only legal in 12 states today. I expect we'll be closer to 20 by the end of 2025. But if it's not legal in your state, I would encourage you to talk to your local legislators to get it, make it legal. It just makes sense.
Yeah.
And foster dialogue about it. Let's get the conversation going. We don't need to latch on to the past and to traditions that may have been just bad decisions.
Mm-hmm.
But, certainly for the earth and in terms of missing an opportunity to allow the continuation of life.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and it is, even though you keep saying the word traditional, it's only been traditional for a couple hundred years.
You're right.
Yeah. Not even that long.
No,
I mean, this is actually the traditional way, right?
Yeah. That's right.
So we want to go back.
Yeah.
That's what I was going to say. It's like, I think the embalming piece ended up becoming part of the Civil War.
That's right.
The bodies being transported back to their families. And that was what was needed to hold that sacred space for people.
Yeah.
And then we kept it because it made money, and it's like, wait, we don't need to keep doing this.
And it makes a lot of money. Yeah.
Indeed.
But you know what I mean? The natural organic reduction also offers funeral homes the opportunity to continue to thrive as a business, but to do so in a more eco-friendly manner and in a way that serves families in a very different way. So, one doesn't have to be lost to support the growth of another,
Exactly.
And I think some forward-thinking funeral homes and crematory operators are understanding that to be the case. So there are TerraCare partners. Yeah.
Hey.
Yeah.
May it continue.
So what frightens you about the end of life?
I really don't have any fear about end of life. It was interesting. When I became a hospice volunteer 7 years ago, one of the exercises in our hospice training course was we were asked to take 15 minutes and write down a list of all the things you feel like you need to accomplish before you die. And, some folks were writing feverishly. And when we came to share our list, I kind of shyly acknowledged, I don't have a list. I'm okay. I'm like, would I like to go to Nepal? I would love to go. But, would I like to jump out of a plane again? Yeah, I would. But, no, I don't, would I like to be there for, my 4 kids' weddings? Yeah, I would, but I don't feel like I need to. I don't feel like that has to be. I'm comfortable that my life will play out the way it's meant to. And I'm okay to be called home whenever I am. And I don't mean to say that, flippantly or in an insensitive way. There are a lot of people that are very afraid of end of life. In fact, there's one story of a woman I served as a hospice volunteer who was very afraid. Would you like me to share that? It was Yeah. So I was working at the hospice care center where I volunteer. And I usually ask if there's anyone that's actively dying. And if there's more than one, I ask if any one of those actively dying patients are alone. And this night, there was a woman that was alone. And so I entered her room and I found her rigid as can be. I could tell she was so tense and her eyes were darting back and forth and her breathing was labored. I could just tell she was absolutely petrified. And my typical process that I go through when I enter a room to serve a patient is I'll pause at the door and say a silent prayer to be a channel of peace for this individual in whatever way that may manifest. And I also check at the door any preconceived notions of what I think I ought to do to serve. And I just allow the situation to unfold. And for her, and then I go and I'll sit at their bedside and I'll usually take their hand and I'll introduce myself to them, whether they're responsive or not. And then I just sit quietly with them. And on this night, I just felt compelled not to sit, but to stand at her bedside. And so I held her left hand in my left hand. And then I used my right hand and I just gently stroked the top of her head. And I looked into her eyes and I silently just conveyed to her, I just felt this overwhelming sense of love. And I conveyed to her, you are so loved. You are so loved. And she looked up at me and she completely relaxed and she took her last breath. But that was a woman who was alone, who was afraid to let go. She didn't know what she was supposed to do. She didn't know how to navigate these waters of end of life. And in that situation, very similar to many other situations, I've witnessed that when people at the end of life can truly surrender to knowing that they're loved and that they are surrounded by unconditional love, offers an unprecedented sense of peace for them and allows them to let go and transition. And that was, it was beautiful. It was able to happen for that woman that night. And I felt incredibly privileged to serve in that way. Yeah.
That's so beautiful. It's such a sacred moment. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah,
and thank you for being there for all the folks too, because it's an important work.
Yeah. Although when I left my tech job to go do hospice volunteer work, I had a young guy approach me and say, Mike, I think it's so great that you're doing this to give back. And, and I'm like, Mark, let me tell you, I'm not doing it to give back. I'm doing it because it brings me joy. I'm actually quite selfish in that regard. So I'm not doing it. Please don't misread the situation. I do it because it brings me joy. Yeah. And if it didn't bring me joy, I probably wouldn't do it.
Yeah. I get that question a lot too. And it's interesting because when I'm with folks at the end of life and I leave that space, I do feel a lighter beingness.
Yeah.
Like a little joy, a little, I don't know, just I feel light. I feel great.
Yeah.
And most people make the assumption that being anywhere near anyone who's transitioning will automatically create like darkness or depression or morbidity. And what I say to them is like, I don't think I've had a single situation where I walked out of there feeling anything but just joy in the presence of the divine, just holding this whole space. I'm like, ooh. Yeah.
You're right. I think it allows us to align with our higher selves and to be aware of that light that connects us all. I remember sitting with one guy in the care center again. He wasn't actively dying that day, though he died, I think, 3 days later. But I remember walking into his room, and he had been a hermit for probably the last decade of his life. He had a big tumor on the side of his face, and it was oozing. It was a challenging dynamic for him, and he was really embarrassed by it. Again, that human frailty that has us worrying about what people are thinking. And when I entered his room, he pulled this handkerchief over his tumor, and I introduced myself, and I offered to do comfort touch on him, which is like gentle acupressure on the hands and feet. And I told him, I said, look, if you're covering up that tumor for my benefit, don't worry about it. I really don't care. And he's like, seriously? I'm like, yeah, it doesn't bother me at all. He's like, okay. So he let the handkerchief drop. And as I was doing comfort touch on him, I could see he started to relax. And in that relaxation and in that realization that he was unconditionally loved, I'm not there to judge. I'm just there to be with him and to serve. That gave him permission to be relaxed and to then think about some things that the stress of being in the care center and thinking about death and, what hadn't allowed him to. By the time I got to his feet, he shared with me that he had remembered being a 3-year-old on his tricycle in his driveway back in Iowa. And I said, wow. And he said, yeah, it's vivid. And I remember seeing the sun coming up over the trees. And I remember thinking to myself, I used to be part of that light. And, and so I let that hang there for a minute. And then I said, can I ask you a question? He said, sure. And I said, do you think you were really separated from the light at that time? Or was it just your perception as a 3-year-old? And he thought, and he's like, I think it was just my perception at the time. So, and here he is, a couple days away from dying, with the opportunity to reflect on his life and to remember that time of connection, and to then be able to make the tie between that experience and his current state right now, knowing he's still connected. And I can't help but think that it brought him some greater peace as he entered that final stage. And I think what fostered that was an awareness that he was loved unconditionally, and to feel that sense. And it's amazing how often the experience of unconditional love can open up our own hearts to realize our connection with others and everything that's around us. And I think that's a gift that is available to everyone that's either at the end of life, supporting someone at the end of life, or just in our everyday interaction with others, to the extent that we can understand how we're all one and part of a single light. It opens up opportunities for us all.
It really does. And, thank you so very much for sharing that story.
Yeah.
And what I want to just tell anyone who's out there listening is be at ease. Be at ease, like open up, right? Radical surrender to the light. Because it not only fosters a well-being in the person who is caregiving potentially, but it also allows there not to be shame or distress with the person who is actively dying. I think that I too have seen that when that the person is dying, but they're trying to take care of everybody around them.
Right.
And, nobody is giving permission. Nobody's letting that love, that flow happen. So, anyone listening, just soften your heart. Even if you've never done this, just soften the heart and just be present. You don't have to say anything different. You don't just be there. That's the gift.
Yeah.
I love that. I love that. Yes. Like you said, the sense of just being open to and not coming in with any preconceptions. I think it's also interesting to note that the people we've talked to who've had near-death experiences say over and over again that what they experienced in that space was total, unconditional light and love.
Yeah.
So that's where you're going. You might as well start appreciating it now.
Yeah. That's right. I love that. Yeah, it's available to all of us right now.
Yes, it is.
And the absence of that oftentimes ends up being a gate to peace, or to release, to surrendering, to allowing that transition to happen. So, it's heightened at the end of life as well.
Yeah.
I have one other story if you've got time. Do we have another?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, yeah. So there's a very similar setup here. It was at the care center. There was a woman who was actively dying. She was unresponsive. She had labored breathing. She was in her early to mid 50s, and I believe she was dying from ALS. I never met her before, but I went and I sat with her. And for those folks that are unresponsive, I usually, after I introduce myself to them and I take their hand, I silently communicate to them that I'm just a soul, just like them, and I'm here to accompany them on their final leg of their journey and support them in any way that I can. I do that with my eyes closed, and I keep them closed, and I'll typically see in my mind's eye myself walking with this person. In the perspective is usually from behind. With this woman, though, I didn't see us walking together. What I saw was her on the other side of her body, raising her hands and looking at me saying, yes, yes. And then she took her last breath and passed.
Oh my God. Wow.
I don't know what transpired there, but I suspect it had something to do with her being accompanied with unconditional love by someone else, and her somehow understanding that and then realizing, okay, I can let go. And she did.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And so I think that ends up being a gate that, that people don't know how to pass through until they can truly surrender with the knowledge that they are unconditionally loved. And it's not just by the person at the bedside or the nurses or family members. It's knowing that we are always surrounded in unconditional love.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
To the extent that we can open our hearts to that reality, it opens a world of possibilities for us all, not just the dying, but all of us, day in and day out.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. Beautiful. So true. So true. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yeah.
We always like to check in with folks, and this is kind of for help for us and for our audience to think about or to ask how you resource yourself if you're feeling overwhelmed or if you get just tired, or, is there something, practices that you have that help you kind of lift up again after a really tough day or a really tough experience?
Yeah, well, kind of like what Ana Luisa was saying, I get rejuvenated by serving folks at the end of life. It brings me back to an awareness of our connectedness. So I wouldn't say that work drains me and it's something that I need relief from or care for. It's in the everyday stresses of life with, family and work and, other things that it's trying to find time to just sort of quiet, to be present. A big helpful go-to for me is gratitude, to think about all that I have going, in my life. And this may sound a little woo-woo, but I truly believe that I'm perpetually supported by this beautiful entourage of spiritual beings that help enlighten me, help realign me, help me get back into alignment with my higher self and the knowledge that we're all one. And so when I get caught up in a spreadsheet or financial model, it's really helpful to just come back to why are we here? And I believe we're here to love unconditionally and to help others, learn how to do that as well. And that's about it. And when we do that, we find beautiful peace and serenity, regardless of what material dynamics may be at play in our lives, So I try and return to that reality.
It's kind of funny that in a way what you're doing is sort of what we kind of backwards from what we normally think of, that, I got overwhelmed by this work at the end of life, but instead you're going to end of life to lift yourself
Resource.
up.
There you go.
And also just to remember that grace.
The
grace of like you said, the surrounding love that's always there. Yeah. That's so beautiful.
Yeah.
It
Beautiful.
is.
Thank you.
So our final pieces, what do you wish we'd asked you?
I think you asked some really good questions. I think we've covered some wonderful topics. There's just such a beautiful opportunity for people to, I think you said it, Ana Luisa, get comfortable with the idea of being with folks at the end of life and talking about it, and being open to the reality that the end of life is a transition, and allow yourself the privilege and the beautiful opportunity to experience that transition in peace. And you can do that by surrendering to the reality that we're all one, we're all connected, and that all will be well.
Okay. Would you like to read your poem, or do you want us to read it, or what would you like to do?
Why don't you guys read it? Sure, go for it.
And this is a beautiful poem.
And my prayer when I enter a room or enter a facility as a hospice volunteer or an end-of-life doula, my prayer is make me a channel of peace. Yeah. So that's why. And I have a St. Francis medal that I wear.
Maybe you should have gone to the Franciscans. You might have been.
I know.
Happier there.
Why am I wearing a St. Dominic? Yeah. That's funny.
That's great.
Yeah.
Well, let's share the prayer of St. Francis
All right.
with our listeners and each other. Lord, make me an instrument of thy peace. Where there is hatred, let me sow love. Where there is injury, pardon. Where there is doubt, faith. Where there is despair, hope. Where there is darkness, light. Where there is sadness, joy. O divine Master, grant that I may not so much seek to be consoled as to console, to be understood as to understand, to be loved as to love. For it is in giving that we receive, it is in pardoning that we are pardoned, and it is in dying that we are born to eternal life.
That's great. Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah.
So good.
That. Thank you. Beautiful.
Thank you for that.
Yeah.
Such a good reminder.
Yeah.
Well, thank you again for joining us today. It's been a real privilege. We were, when you went away for a minute, we were both just going, oh, God, what a wonderful guy.
Well, thank you for having me. And thanks for all the wonderful work you both do. I really appreciate it. Yeah. Good.
Thanks so much for joining us on the End of Life Conversations. We appreciate you and look forward to sharing our stories. We encourage you to subscribe to have access to premium episodes and extra resources. Links to our guests and their recommendations and a transcript of this episode will be in the podcast notes.
Yes, thank you so much. And please tell all your friends. Follow us on social media, and again, consider subscribing for some excellent premium content. We want to acknowledge that the music we are using was composed and produced by Charles Heastand. We also want to acknowledge that we live on unceded lands that have been cared for thousands of years by Indigenous peoples who are still here.